it off and try again. Dust yourself off and try again, try again.
Good morning. How are you? Welcome to the Table Talk. This is the first Table Talk podcast for 2024. I'm a day late. We had some family still here for the holiday period. So on Saturday, which would be the normal time to have the podcast, we went and visited them. They were out here to partake of the Rose Bowl game, which that was one of the college playoff games from the Crimson Tide of Alabama, and I happen to be Alabama alumni, University of Alabama, and they were playing Michigan. Obviously, we lost that game. It was a very competitive game, so I was a little bit reluctant to engage in a conversation about sports. There's two areas always fraught with danger. That would be talking about politics and or talking about sports. So I'm pulling a Paul Feinbaum as a foray into sports commentary. This is my first sports commentary, so yeah, we'll see how it goes. So anyway, let me go to the camera. I'm going to be crediting some of these as credits. I will be crediting here the NCAA football organization. So this is how the game turned out, the playoff games. So we'll cover Alabama. So Alabama was number 5 going into the playoff game. Michigan was number 1, and they were playing in the Rose Bowl. One of 4 spots, or these two would be 2 spots. But yeah, so these were the playoff spots for the championship game. Obviously, Alabama lost, but it was very competitive. Also, Washington over to Texas. Texas was number 3, Washington number 2 in the regular season. So again, that was a very competitive game. So I watched both of these, and I was amazed at how highly competitive these were. In the Alabama-Michigan case, it was a tit for tat. And first, in fact, in the fourth quarter, Alabama was ahead early in the fourth quarter, maybe up to the midpoint. And then just at the very end, it went into overtime, and we had a failure on snap and snapper and the ball, and kind of low on the ground. You just got it, and we just messed up. So anyway, I'm looking forward to Monday, this coming Monday, which would be the championship game. And in that case, Michigan will be playing number 1, will be playing number 2, Washington. And that's at 4:30. I'm not sure if that's Eastern. You need to check your television schedule on that. I don't know if that's Pacific, Central, or Eastern. So yeah, anyway. So today's topic is about 2 things. We're going to talk about the controversies surrounding the Alabama-Michigan game in particular. Okay, so what happened was Florida State, 13-0 in the regular season, did not win a berth into the playoff spots. And so there was an extreme amount of controversy, especially when Alabama was number 8 And even though they beat Georgia in the Southeastern Conference game, and they still came in at number 5 overall. So you would think that Florida State would have been chosen. But my question on the table is, did the playoff committee, college football playoff committee, get the decision right to not let Florida State be the 4th team, but chose Alabama? Now, I'm going to go on the record as saying I believe the committee did make the right decision here, and I'll explain why. So, let me get to. All right, so here are some of the commentaries. This one being by NCAA. Said Georgia dominates Florida State in the 2023 Orange Bowl. 9 straight touchdown drives lead the Bulldogs to a record-setting 63-3 win over Florida State. ESPN said Georgia wins Orange Bowl in 60-point rout of Florida State. The New York Post, Florida State versus Georgia prediction, Orange Bowl odds pick best bet. It was obviously Georgia. In USA Today, can depleted Florida, now notice the word depleted, can depleted Florida State defeat Georgia in the Orange Bowl? Here's our prediction. And then WJCL on MSN says Georgia obliterates Florida State in Orange Bowl. So what we're talking about is a highly one-sided, lopsided score. It was a 60-point rout. Now, why did that happen? Well, it happened for a number of reasons. This is kind of a little synopsis of the game in the quarters. 63-3 was the final score. Georgia scored early in the first quarter, 7-0, and then in the second quarter they just went ham and got 35 unanswered points to Florida State's 3. That was all the points that Florida would get for the entire game was in the second quarter. Then in the third quarter, they came in, got another 14 runs, Georgia, and then in the fourth quarter, rounded it out with another 7 points for an overall 63-3. So, yes, it was an obliteration. So you have to kind of go back and kind of look at what happened. So I'm going to get off of that. So let me see. Trying to look for my. Let's see. So after the game, Kirby Smart, that's Georgia's head coach, he lamented that Florida State University opt-outs after Georgia Orange Bowl route. So what happened was there was 24 people that opted out and not to play in the Orange Bowl. So you would expect when you're playing like Florida State, a highly ranked team, very good team, went 13-0 for the regular season, would have 24 of its players just decide, I'm done, I'm not going to play in the bowls, even though it's Georgia that we're playing. So Kirby Smart had said he lamented that Florida State opted out after Georgia's Orange Bowl route. That's what contributed. So in that, they were saying that the two top ranked teams outside the college football playoff faced off in the Capital One Orange Bowl, but only six ranked Georgia looked the part Saturday, and that led to frustrations from Bulldogs coach Kirby Smart. Sorry, at the Georgia demolished number 5 Florida State 63 in what was the largest margin of victory in bowl history, topping the Bulldogs' 58-point win over TCU in last season's national championship game. But the lopsided score was due in part, at least, to a host of opt-outs and injuries for the Seminoles. So what happened there is they had several players, actually, and let me see if I can find what those were. Well, I don't have my thing, but what happened was their main quarterback on Florida State was injured earlier in the season, and then their secondary fallback quarterback also got injured pre this game. And then it looked like there were a large or quite a few significant other players in other positions. I think 9 in all. That were on the injury list. So they were coming into this game, to the playoff game, not the same 13-0 caliber team, but something different. They weren't at their best. They didn't have the best players, and so it resulted in this rout. So recognizing that, the college football playoff committee, selection committee, recognized this fact, and they made a very controversial decision to forego a 13-0 winning team and went with Alabama, which prior to the playoff games was number 8 position in the top 10. After they won over Georgia in the SEC game, they were number 5. All right. So what we have here is a situation where the character or the nature of the team was quite different in the latter part of the season, when you would expect that the team would be in its prime condition if they were going to be playing off for a national championship. And that wasn't the case. Alabama, on the other hand, had their loss to Texas A&M, the second game early in the season. They just got progressively better every game since, and had a 10-1 record, and then went into the SEC and beat Georgia, which was rated number 1. So, and that was a highly competitive game. There's also issues about the conference, which is the stronger conference. There's opinions about. I personally think SEC is the strongest conference on the college football scene, and there's evidence to that. You see a lot of teams starting to migrate toward the SEC. In fact, we'll be adding, our conference will be expanding, but that's not to say, like in Michigan's case, their conference produced a championship team. So, and it was highly competitive. So I'm not saying that the conferences are not competitive with each other, but there are spotted cases where that's true. And I'm thinking in this particular case, Florida State was in that situation. uh, as far as what kind of teams that they had played, record, and then obviously the loss of their quarterbacks and some significant other players. All right, so if you have any opinions on that, I welcome it. This is my first foray into sports commentary, so I welcome any exchange. All right, so the other part of the conversation that I wanted to have today is about the NIL. Okay, what is NIL? So the NIL is this. So what is NIL in college football? Here's what you need to know. It means literally name, image, and likeness, and refers to college athletes' ability to profit off of themselves from their name, their image, and likeness. And it gives in NIL gives college players the right to publicity that ordinary citizens already have, but that the NCAA previously did not allow. Players can accept money from businesses in exchange for using them in their product placements or advertisements, and so they are able to profit off that. So prior to NIL era, college football has always been a strictly amateur sport since 1869. So officially it still is, but for the first time, players on the field are now permitted to legally put some money in their own pocket. Now, typically, you would expect that the college players would get scholarships. Some don't, some are walk on things, but they do get compensation in some respects. So, but overall, they're still considered to be amateurs. Now, there's always the question, well, college football is a dangerous sport. You can see that with the injuries and so if these players are expected to be like modern day Roman gladiators and get to beat the snot out of them, then aren't they entitled to some kind of recompense or reward for putting their bodies on the line? There's been deaths even. So deaths and permanent injuries, paralysis and stuff. So it's a dangerous sport. So there is some understanding and agreement that, hey, they need to maybe get rewards for that. All right. So the NCAA NIL rules explain what it means for student athletes and what comes next. I credit NCAA on this. The NCAA, now this is when they were originally starting to get all of the contractual things kind of thing. So they announced it has accepted recommendations on how best to update its rules on name, image, and likeness, NIL compensation. The announcement was expected for quite some time, even as individual states passed their own legislation allowing for NCAA student athletes to profit off of their NIL, name, image, and likeness. That said, the organization only accepted recommendations from a working group headed by the Big East Commissioner Val Ackerman and Ohio State's athletic director, Gene Smith, on how to implement these rules. So the final rules, which have yet to be defined and were left nebulous in that announcement, are not expected to go into effect in 2020-21 academic year. So we're now past that point. So we are in the NIL era. So, and if you notice, I have noticed a lot of players, especially on Alabama. I've seen like on the Heisman Trophy commercials, you can see their uh, product placement in different situations. So they are in that now era. But the thing about it is, not all players are getting compensated. It's just the high profile ones that I'm aware of. So again, they're to be fair, I mean, if other students, even though they're not, let's say a kicker or punter or whatever, snapper, they may not. They're just as much jeopardy, impairment, and risk to injury. So there needs to be some workaround rules in which they could compensate too. So on this, if we're going to go down this road, which apparently we are. So this was kind of the important dates. So I know this is pre-COVID. So August 30, 2020, each of the three NCAA divisions 1, 2, and 3, are expected to have drafted NIL legislative proposals. And of course, we're talking about history here. So, October 2020, each of the respective divisional governing bodies were expected to have revised NIL legislation, and January 31, 2021, divisional bodies were expected to enact all NIL legislative proposed that would go into effect no later than the start of the 21-22 academic year. So, what's covered under the rule? NCAA's comprehensive report only stipulated rule changes be made for two categories: third-party endorsements and compensation for student-athlete work, product, or business activities. Two areas that covers a lot of ground. So basically, any proposed rule change would allow student athletes to do business with third parties for promotional activities, for them to receive compensation for outside business adventures. That also included any potential compensation generated as a result of social media creator or influencer or brand ambassadors or anything like that, assuming whatever their fair market value was in play at that time. And that said, there were several proposed guardrails. There is a regulation that would determine whether a student athlete still would receive NCAA's blessing, so they did put some guardrails up. The proposed guardrails for compensation are these. Any compensation received by student athletes for NIL activities represents a genuine payment for use of their name or image or likeness, and is simply not, let me pull it over here, a disguised form of pay for athletes' participation. Schools and conference play no role in student athletic NIL activities. Student athletes are not being compensated for uses of their NIL in situations in which they have no legal right to demand such compensation. Schools or boosters are not using NIL opportunities as recruiting inducement. The role, and by the way, speaking of that, one thing that I did notice was when you're talking about schools or boosters or not using NIL as a recruiting inducement, there was an interview that Nick Saban did after the game where he was plugging NIL expansion needed to was, I guess, asking everybody in the stadium or whatever to support NIL, I guess meaning give money. So I thought that was interesting. I wouldn't have thought that was permitted. The role of third parties in student athlete NIL activities is regulated. Modernization of NIL rules does not interfere with NCAA members' efforts in the areas of diversity, inclusion, or gender equity. Assuming those precursors are met, assuming those are met, schools and conferences must then ensure they do not make endorsement payments themselves, help locate, arrange, or facilitate endorsement opportunities, or allow any boosters to use such opportunities as a recruiting inducement or means of paying for athletics participation. And in my opinion, I would also add coaching staff should not be pushing or encouraging NIL activities. I think it should be a neutral thing here. But it is what it is. And apart from NIL guard rules, the working committee also included several areas that might be considered further regulation or outright exclusion. These are whether alcohol, tobacco, sports, gambling should be precluded, whether athletics, shoes, and apparel companies should be excluded or have limited participation in newly permitted activities due to the history of encouraging or facilitating recruitment and other rule infractions. How best to implement safeguards that don't impose undue burdens on student-athlete time, school academics time, how to keep boosters from circumventing NCAA rules, and to creating a framework that permits student athletes to engage and consult with professional services providers in connection with their NIL business activities, and creating resources on campus to educate student athletes about the newly permitted activities and in a manner consistent with gender equity. Unfortunately for the fans of NCAA football franchise, the committee did not recommend any changes to its NIL rule as it relates to group licensing, which would be required in order for them to participate in video game franchises. All right. So I think that's all I'll read up on there. So as far as just opinions, we are heading down a new era that may, in fact, destroy college football as we have known it since 1876. And there's a real danger here that we may be creating a minor professional league, and that players, being that they're knowledgeable of could be injured, and so they're trying to gain compensation early, may elect to leave, like their freshman, sophomore year, and go into some minor league kind of a thing, or something like that, or go into the draft. So there's a real danger that going forward, college football, as we know it, may dramatically change, and all because of the money situation. So I'm just throwing it out there on the table. What do y'all think? Please provide comments in the section down below. I'll read those comments and may do some additional sports commentary in the future. So I like sports. I like politics. I will definitely not be talking about politics because that's a really messed up situation in our country, and I don't see a fix for it. But at least in college sports, seems to be some accommodative recognition to be civil when you're playing each other's teams. Even I know you get rowdy. I know there's fights sometimes here and there, but most importantly, from what I see, you got players of all from different, alumni sitting right there together, all over across the stadium. So yeah, they're civil for the most part. Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. Let me go back. So, again, I apologize not having the table talk on Saturday, since the podcast is kind of early in its beginnings. I mean, I don't think that's a big whoop whoop. So, I guess if I was Rogan, might be Joe Rogan. It might be a problem. But I don't think this podcast is a problem yet. So, but yeah. So this is Sunday. I hope each and every one of you fans and had a great Christmas and New Year's holiday. I hope you have a great remainder of the weekend. We do have the National Football College Football Championship game at 4 p.m. Don't know if that's Eastern, Central, or Pacific, so you need to check your TV guide schedule. But yeah, watch it. Michigan and Washington will be playing in that. So we're going to be pushing for Michigan since they beat Alabama. So I got to give them that. So all right. Well, y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you next Saturday on the Table Talk with Bob Colbert. I'm your host, Bob Colbert. Y'all take care. Bye bye.
What you do, you want to me, but I can't let it go so easily. Until I see what it could be eternity or just a week. But now I can't speak. It's off the chain, it's working now. But will it change? This ain't a yes, this ain't a no. Just do your thing, we'll see how it go. Oh, rush it, don't succeed. Yeah, dust yourself off and try again. Dust it off and try again.